I remember the exact moment everything shifted, though at the time, it felt like just another quiet afternoon returning home. The house smelled faintly of lavender and dust, the way it always did after I'd been away for a few days. I dropped my suitcase by the door, slipped off my shoes, and walked into the kitchen, expecting nothing more than a pile of unopened mail and a slightly wilted plant or two. Instead, I found an envelope sitting perfectly centered on the table. It wasn't the usual stack of bills or flyers. This one was thick, cream-colored, almost elegant. My name, Emma, was written across the front in looping script I didn't recognize. Something about it made my stomach tighten. I set my keys down slowly and picked it up. The paper felt expensive, deliberate. Whoever wrote this wanted it to matter. Inside was a short note. I thought it was only fair to give something back, considering everything you've done for us. Enjoy it.
El,
I read it twice.
el,
There was only one person that could be Lydia, my son Daniel's wife. A strange unease crept over me. Lydia wasn't the type to leave sentimental notes. If anything, she avoided emotional gestures unless there was an audience. I hadn't even seen her before my trip. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from my bank. At first, I almost ignored it. Probably just a routine alert. But something made me open it. And there it was. $4,800, Hawthorne Gallery, approved. My heart dropped, so suddenly I had to grip the edge of the table. No, that's not right. I hadn't stepped foot in any gallery. I hadn't spent more than $50 all week. My pulse quickened as I opened the full statement. Everything else was normal: groceries, gas, a small bookstore purchase. And then that charge.
bright.
Obvious. Impossible to miss. I dialed the bank immediately, my fingers clumsy against the screen. After what felt like an eternity of hold music, a calm voice answered. Yes, Ms. Emma. I can confirm the transaction. It was made in person at Hawthorne Gallery. Chip verified, PIN entered. My PIN. I repeated, my voice barely steady. That's not possible. But even as I said it, a cold realization began forming. I did have my PIN written down, hidden in the back of my planner. And Lydia had been in my house while I was gone. Daniel had insisted on it. She just wants to help, Mom, he had said. Water your plants, check the mail. It's no big deal. No big deal. I thanked the representative, hung up, and stood there in silence. The house suddenly didn't feel like mine anymore. I didn't sit down.
I didn't unpack.
I grabbed my bag, my keys, and drove straight to Hawthorne Gallery. The place was exactly what you'd expect. Quiet, polished, filled with things that looked too fragile to breathe near. A man behind the counter looked up and smiled politely. Good afternoon. Can I help you? Yes, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I need information about a purchase made here. Under my name. He asked for a moment, typed something into his system, then looked back at me.
Oh, yes.
That was picked up 2 days ago. Picked up? I echoed.
Yes.
A ceramic sculpture. Quite a striking piece, actually. Your daughter-in-law has excellent taste. My chest tightened. I'm sorry, what? She said it was a surprise for you, he continued casually. Very thoughtful. Thoughtful. I forced a small, controlled smile. Could I see the receipt? He printed it without hesitation. There at the bottom was a signature.
Mine.
Or something close enough that most people wouldn't question it. I stared at it for a long moment. It wasn't just the money. It was the assumption, the audacity, the quiet certainty that I wouldn't do anything about it. Thank you, I said finally, folding the paper carefully. I walked out without another word. The drive to Daniel and Lydia's house felt longer than usual, though it was only 15 minutes. That house, my house, technically, I had bought it years ago as an investment. When Daniel and Lydia had struggled after their wedding, I offered it to them, at a rent so low it barely covered maintenance. Just until things stabilize, I told them. That was 4 years ago. Now, As I pulled into the driveway, everything looked perfect. The lawn trimmed, the windows spotless. Lydia always cared about appearances. I knocked. She opened the door almost immediately. Her smile appeared on cue, bright, polished. And then it flickered. Emma, I didn't expect you back so soon. I came directly here, I said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. Her posture stiffened slightly. I see. I think you know why I'm here. She tilted her head, feigning confusion.
Doi.
I held up the receipt. Something changed in her eyes. Not guilt. Recognition. Oh, she said lightly.
That.
That, I repeated, my voice quiet. It's in the living room, she said, turning away as if this were all perfectly normal. I followed her, and there it was. On the mantel, a sleek, modern sculpture, ceramic, abstract, expensive, beautiful even, but not mine.
Why?
I asked. She crossed her arms, studying me. I left you a note. I saw it. Then you understand, she said. No, I said calmly. I don't. She sighed, as if I were the difficult one. Emma, you've done so much for us. The house, the help, it must be exhausting. I just thought it's only fair to give something back. With my own money? I asked. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm being precise. Silence stretched between us. Then she smiled again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. You're not really upset about the money, she said. You can afford it. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger, not even hurt.
Clarity.
I see, I said quietly. She looked almost relieved. I knew you'd understand. I didn't respond. Instead, I looked around the room, the furniture I had helped them afford, the house I had given them access to, the life I had quietly supported. And for the first time, I saw it differently. Not as generosity, but as something that had been taken for granted. I'll be going, I said. That's it, she asked, surprised. For now. As I walked to the door, she called after me. Emma, don't overthink this. It was just a gesture. I paused, my hand on the handle. A gesture.
Yes, it was. Just not the one she thought.
I left without another word. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, the receipt in front of me, the note beside it. And for the first time in years, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. When had kindness turned into expectation? And when had I allowed it? By morning, I had my answer. And, more importantly, I had a plan. I woke up before sunrise, though I hadn't really slept. The house was quiet in that heavy, almost suffocating way that only comes after a long night of thinking too much. The kind of silence where every memory feels louder than it should. I made coffee out of habit, not because I wanted it. It sat untouched on the table, growing cold as I pulled an old box from the hallway closet, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were photographs, letters, pieces of a life I had built long before Lydia ever entered it. I sat down and started going through them slowly. There was Daniel as a baby, wrapped in a pale blue blanket, his tiny hand gripping my finger like I was the only stable thing in his world. Then Daniel at 10, grinning proudly beside a crooked bookshelf he'd insisted on building himself. Then later graduation, his first job, the day he told me he was getting married. I paused on that one. Lydia stood beside him, flawless as always, her smile bright but somehow distant. Even in the photo, she didn't look like she was joining something, more like she was stepping into a role she intended to control. At the time, I had ignored that feeling. I wanted Daniel to be happy. That was always enough for me. After his father passed away, it had been just the two of us. I was 39, suddenly alone, with a son who needed stability more than anything else. I worked relentlessly, long days at the office, nights balancing accounts for small local businesses just to make sure we stayed afloat. There were nights I barely slept, mornings I could hardly stand, but Daniel never saw that. To him, I was always steady, always there, and I had been proud of that, proud of raising a good man. At least, I thought I had. I set the photo aside and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. When Daniel married Lydia, I tried, truly tried, to welcome her. I invited her into my home, into my life, into traditions that had once just been ours. I listened, I adjusted, I made space. But somehow, it had never been enough. Or maybe it had been too much. Because slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. At first, it was small. A comment here and there, delivered lightly, always with a smile. Emma, your place has such a vintage charm. Or, I admire how comfortable you are sticking to the same style for so many years. Harmless if you didn't look too closely. But I had looked, and I had felt it. Then came the subtle rearranging when she visited. A chair moved. A painting adjusted. Once, she reorganized my entire kitchen while I was out, claiming she thought it would be more functional. I said nothing. Daniel noticed none of it. Or maybe he chose not to. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the pale light of morning begin to stretch across the street. There had been moments, clear ones, when I should have spoken up. The day she accidentally chipped the only porcelain cup I had left from my mother's collection. The way she laughed it off, dismissing it as just a thing. The time she hosted dinner in my house and replaced my cooking with her own without asking, explaining to the guests that she wanted something a bit more modern. Each time, I told myself it wasn't worth conflict, that keeping peace mattered more. But peace, I realize now, is not the same as silence. And silence, over time, becomes permission. I returned to the table and picked up the note Lydia had left. I thought it was only fair.
Fair.
I almost laughed. There was nothing fair about using someone's trust like a blank check.
My phone buzzed again.
Daniel. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Mum. His voice sounded normal. Too normal.
Daniel.
There was a brief pause. Lydia said you stopped by yesterday. I did. She mentioned something about a misunderstanding? I closed my eyes for a second.
Of course she had framed it that way.
There's no misunderstanding, I said calmly. Another pause. Okay, he said slowly. Do you want to tell me what's going on? Yes, I said. But not over the phone. He hesitated. That bad. That clear. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he sighed.
All right.
I'll come by later today. Good. When I hung up, I didn't feel anxious. That surprised me. I should have been. Instead, there was a strange steadiness in my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to soften anything. I wasn't preparing to minimize my own feelings just to keep things comfortable. I was done doing that. The rest of the morning passed quietly. I cleaned, not because the house needed it, but because I needed something to do with my hands. I organized papers, sorted through old documents, and eventually pulled out a folder labeled property. Inside were all the details of the house Daniel and Lydia were living in. Ownership papers, tax records, and a simple, informal agreement I had written years ago outlining the rent. Month to month. Flexible. Too flexible.
I stared at it for a long time.
I had always told myself I was helping them build a future. But what if I had just been delaying it? Enabling something that should have been addressed long ago? I picked up a pen and tapped it lightly against the table. The numbers in my head were clear. Market value for that house was easily double, no, closer to triple, what they were paying. I had known that.
I just chose not to act on it. Until now.
A quiet knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Daniel, right on time. I opened it to find him standing there, hands in his pockets, a slight crease between his brows. Hey, he said.
Come in.
He stepped inside, glancing around like he hadn't been there in months. Maybe he hadn't. We sat across from each other at the table. For a moment, Neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled. Okay, tell me everything.
So I did.
I told him about the charge, about the gallery, about the signature, about the note. I slid it across the table toward him. He read it once, then again. His expression changed slowly, confusion giving way to disbelief, then something heavier. She wrote this, he asked quietly. Yes. And she used your card? Yes. She said it was a gift, he muttered. It was, I said. Just not from her. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything yet. He looked up at me. Why didn't you call me right away? I held his gaze. Because I needed to be sure I wasn't going to be talked out of how I felt. That landed. I could see it. Mom, he started, then stopped. There was guilt there. And something else. Awareness, maybe. This isn't just about the sculpture, I said. I figured. It's about years, Daniel. He looked down. I didn't see it, he admitted. I know. That doesn't make it okay. No, I agreed. It doesn't. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. So what happens now? He asked finally. I folded my hands in front of me. That depends on what you're willing to see. He met my eyes again. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't look away. Daniel stayed longer than I expected that day. At first, the conversation moved slowly, like we were both stepping carefully across something fragile, unsure where it might crack. But eventually, the hesitation faded, and what replaced it was something we hadn't had in years. Honesty without interruption. He asked questions. Real ones. Not the kind people ask just to move past a topic, but the kind that come when someone is finally ready to understand. When did this start? He asked at one point, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. I thought about it. Not all at once, I said. That's the problem. If it had been obvious from the beginning, I would have said something. But it wasn't. It was gradual. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. She never said anything outright. I continued. Not in a way that could be easily called out. It was always just enough to make me question whether I was overreacting. Daniel let out a quiet breath. That sounds like her. There was no anger in his voice yet. Just recognition. And that mattered more. I stood up and walked over to the mantel, picking up one of the photographs I had taken out earlier that morning. It was one of him as a teenager. Awkward, smiling, still soft around the edges. You used to tell me everything, I said, handing it to him. He looked at it, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I remember that haircut, he said. It was terrible. It really was. For a brief moment, we both laughed. But it didn't last. I don't know when that stopped, I said quietly. He stared at the photo a little longer before answering. I think after I got married, he admitted. I think so too. He set the photo down carefully, like it meant more than just paper. I didn't notice it happening, he said. I thought I was just building my own life, you know? Creating space. I wanted you to, I said. That's what you're supposed to do. But I let that turn into distance. Yes. And I let things slide, he added, his voice tightening slightly. Things I should have questioned. I didn't respond right away, because that was the truth. And we both knew it. After a moment, he looked up again. Did you ever think about telling me? I did, I said honestly. More than once. So why didn't you? I met his eyes. Because every time I imagined that conversation, I saw you defending her. He flinched slightly. I didn't want to put you in that position, I continued. And I didn't want to risk losing what little connection we still had. His expression shifted, something like regret settling in. You wouldn't have lost me. I wasn't sure of that. That silence hit harder than anything else we'd said. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment, then covered his face with his hands. I feel like I missed years, he said quietly. I softened at that. You didn't miss them, I said. You were there. You just weren't looking in the right direction. He let out a long breath, then lowered his hands. I need to fix this, he said. I studied him carefully. Fix what? All of it, he replied. With you. With her. The way things have been. That's not something you can fix all at once. I know, he said, but I can start. I nodded slowly.
Yes.
You can. He sat up straighter then, something more solid settling into his posture. What do you want to do about the charge? He asked. There it was. The practical question. The one that would force action. I haven't decided yet, I said. There are options. I could dispute it. I could file a report. Or I could demand she return it. He winced slightly at the word report. You're thinking about going that far? I'm thinking about what's appropriate, I replied calmly. He nodded. That's fair. I'm not interested in destroying your life, I added. Or hers. But I'm also not going to ignore what happened. I understand, he said quietly. And for the first time, I believed that he did. We sat in silence for a moment, both thinking. Then I reached for the folder on the table and slid it toward him. There's something else. He opened it, scanning the documents inside. It didn't take long for him to realize what he was looking at. The house, he said. Yes. He looked up. You're reviewing the rent. I am. His expression tightened slightly, not defensive, but concerned. By how much? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked, do you know what the current market rate is for that area? He hesitated. Higher than what we're paying. How much higher? He gave a small, uneasy smile. I'm guessing a lot.
Triple, I said.
That landed exactly how I expected it to. He leaned back slowly, processing.
Triple, he repeated.
Yes. And you're thinking about raising it to that? I am. He exhaled slowly, running a hand across his jaw. That's a big jump. It is. We'd have to make some serious changes. I know. He looked at me carefully. Is this because of what happened yesterday? I held his gaze. No, I said. It's because of everything that led up to it. That mattered. I could see him understand that difference. This isn't punishment, I continued. It's correction. He nodded slowly. I understand that. I've been supporting you both for years, I said. And I did it willingly. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being appreciated and started being expected. He didn't argue, because he couldn't. And I won't continue like that, I finished. Another long silence followed, but this one felt different. It wasn't heavy. It was decisive. So what happens next? He asked again. This time, I had an answer. I'm going to give formal notice, I said. 30 days. The rent will be adjusted to reflect market value. He nodded, though I could see the weight of that settling on him. Okay. I expect you to talk to Lydia, I added. I will. And I expect honesty, not excuses. You'll get it. I believed him. At least I wanted to. He stood up after that, slower than when he arrived. Mom, he said, pausing near the door. Yes. I really am sorry. I walked over to him. I know. He hesitated, then pulled me into a hug. It felt unfamiliar at first. Not because we hadn't done it before, but because it had been so long since it meant something this real. I'll handle this, he said quietly. I know you will. When he left, the house felt quiet again, but not empty, not like it had the night before. I returned to the table, sat down, and looked at the documents in front of me. Then I picked up a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. A formal notice.
Clear.
Direct. Unavoidable. By the time I finished, the sun had fully risen, filling the room with light. I read it once more, then folded it carefully and placed it into an envelope. Tomorrow I would deliver it, not as a threat, not as revenge, but as a boundary. And this time, I wasn't going to step back from it. I didn't rush the next morning, even though I woke up early again. This time, The restlessness wasn't from uncertainty, it was from anticipation. There's a difference. The night before had given me something I hadn't felt in a long time: direction. Not anger, not impulse, just a quiet, steady decision that had already been made. The envelope sat on the kitchen table where I had left it, perfectly still, as if it had been waiting for me to catch up to it. I poured myself coffee, and actually drank it this time, slowly, letting the warmth settle into me. Outside, the street was beginning to come alive. Cars passing, a dog barking somewhere in the distance, the ordinary rhythm of a day that, for me, didn't feel ordinary at all. I got dressed with more care than usual. Nothing extravagant, just a simple gray dress, clean lines, comfortable but deliberate. I brushed my hair, added a touch of makeup, and paused for a moment in front of the mirror. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted to recognize myself. And for the first time in a while, I did. The drive to the house felt shorter than ever before. Maybe because I wasn't rehearsing anything in my head this time. I didn't need to. I already knew what I was going to say, and more importantly, what I wasn't going to soften. Lydia's car was in the driveway. Daniel's wasn't.
Good.
This needed to happen before anything could be reshaped or redirected. I picked up the envelope, stepped out of the car, and walked to the front door. My steps were steady, not rushed, not hesitant. Just certain. I knocked. It took a few seconds before the door opened. Lydia stood there, dressed casually but still polished in that effortless way she always managed. Her expression shifted the moment she saw me, not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. "Emma," she said. "Again?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "We need to talk." She hesitated, then stepped aside. I walked in, taking in the same living room as before, the same carefully arranged furniture, the same quiet perfection. And there, still in its place on the mantel, was the sculpture. Unchanged, untouched, as if nothing had happened. "Daniel told me you spoke," she said, closing the door behind me. "We did." "And?" she asked, crossing her arms. "And now I'm here." She gave a small, tight smile. "That doesn't really answer anything." "It will." I held out the envelope. "What's this?" she asked, though something in her tone told me she already sensed it wasn't going to be something she liked. "Open it." She took it, slower this time, less confident than before. She slid the paper out and began to read. I watched her carefully. It didn't take long. Her expression shifted. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally anger. "You're serious?" she said, looking up sharply. "Yes." "You're tripling our rent?" Her voice rose slightly. "Just like that?" "Not just like that," I said evenly. "With 30 days' notice. As required." Her grip tightened on the paper. "This is insane."
No, irraplia.
"It's accurate." She let out a sharp laugh. "Accurate? We're family, Emma. You don't treat family like tenants." I met her gaze without flinching. "I've been treating you better than tenants for years." That hit. I could see it, but she wasn't going to accept it easily. "This is about the sculpture," she snapped. "You're retaliating." "This is about boundaries," I said. The sculpture just made them impossible to ignore. She shook her head, pacing slightly now. "You're overreacting. It was a misunderstanding. I told you that." "No," I said calmly. "You explained it." "That's not the same thing." She stopped, turning back to me. "You really think this is fair?" I tilted my head slightly. "Do you?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a moment, there was silence. Then she tried a different angle. "You know we can't afford that," she said, her tone shifting, less aggressive, more strategic. "You're putting us in an impossible position." "I'm putting you in a real one," I replied. Her eyes narrowed. "You're trying to force us out." "I'm giving you a choice," I said. "Stay and pay market value, or find something within your budget." "That's the same thing," she said sharply.
No, incorrecta.
"It's accountability." She let out a breath, clearly frustrated now. You've always done this, she said. Acted like everything you do is reasonable, even when it's not. I didn't react, because I recognized it for what it was. Deflection. You used my credit card without permission, I said. That's not reasonable. I told you I was going to pay it back. You didn't ask first. It was supposed to be a surprise. It was, I said. Just not the kind you think. Her composure slipped slightly then. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I said quietly. I've been minimizing it for years. This is what it looks like when I stop. That's silence again. But this one was sharper. She looked at me differently now. Not dismissively. Not confidently.
Carefully.
Daniel doesn't agree with this, she said finally. I held her gaze. He understands it. That's not the same thing. It's enough.
She scoffed.
We'll talk about this again when he's here.
You can, I said.
The notice still stands.
Her jaw tightened.
You're really doing this? Yes. And there's no changing your mind? I paused for just a second. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted her to hear the answer clearly.
No.
That landed.
Completely.
She looked down at the paper again, then back at me. This is going to affect Daniel, she said. I know. And you're okay with that? I'm not okay with what's been happening, I replied. This is the result of that. Her expression shifted again, less anger now, more calculation. You're trying to make a point. Yes. At our expense. At the cost of my silence. I corrected. That stopped her. For a moment, she didn't have anything to say. And that was new. I stepped back slightly, giving her space. Not out of kindness, but because the conversation had reached its purpose. I'll give you time to process, I said. She didn't respond. I turned toward the door, but before I reached it, her voice cut through the silence. You think this fixes anything? She asked. I paused, my hand resting lightly on the handle. No, I said without turning around, but it changes everything. I opened the door and stepped outside. The air felt different. Lighter. Not because the situation was resolved, it wasn't, but because, for the first time, I wasn't carrying it alone. As I walked to my car, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Whatever came next would come. But this time, I was ready for it. The call came later that evening, just as the sun was beginning to set. I had expected it, though I didn't know exactly when it would happen. Still, when my phone lit up with Daniel's name, there was a brief moment where I simply stared at it, letting it ring once, twice before answering.
Daniel.
His voice came through immediately, tighter than usual. Mom, I just got home. I assumed you would call. There was a pause on the other end, the kind filled with too many thoughts trying to organize themselves all at once. She showed me the notice, he said finally. I imagined she did. Another pause. And she told me why you gave it to her. Did she? I asked calmly. She said you're doing this because of the sculpture, that you're upset and trying to punish us. I leaned back slightly in my chair, letting out a quiet breath. And what do you think? Silence. Not defensive. Not immediate. Which meant he was thinking. I think, he started then stopped. I think that's part of it. But not all of it. That's correct. I also think, he continued more slowly, that I didn't realize how much you've been doing for us. I didn't respond right away, because that mattered more than anything Lydia had said. And I didn't realize how normal it had become, he added. Like, I stopped seeing it. Yes, I said quietly. That's usually how it happens. There was a shift in his breathing, like he had just sat down. She didn't tell me everything at first, he admitted. About the card. About the note. I figured. I had to ask, he said. More than once. And she admitted it. Of course she had. She said she was going to pay you back. That doesn't make it acceptable. I know, he said quickly. I told her that. That surprised me. Not because he said it, but because he said it without hesitation. There was another pause, but this one felt different. Less uncertain. morphed, grounded. She also said you've always made her feel like she wasn't good enough, he added. I closed my eyes for a brief second. There it was. I've never said that to her, I replied calmly. I know, he said. That stopped me. I mean it, he continued. I've been thinking about everything you told me yesterday, and I think she's been interpreting things in her own way. That's possible. She feels judged, he said. And I've felt disrespected, I replied. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't tense. It was balanced. I should have seen it sooner, he said quietly. Yes, I agreed. You should have.
No anger. No softness.
Just truth. I'm not going to ask you to change your decision, he said after a moment. That, more than anything, told me something had shifted. I appreciate that, I said. But I need to figure out what we're going to do, he added. Because that rent, it's a lot. I know. We'll have to move, he said. That's one option. It's the only realistic one, he replied. We can't afford that on short notice. I understand. Another pause. I wish it hadn't come to this, he said. So do I. And I meant it. Despite everything, I hadn't wanted things to break this way. But sometimes things don't break. They reveal. Can I ask you something? He said. Of course. If this hadn't happened, if Lydia hadn't bought that sculpture, would you still have raised the rent? I thought about it. Honestly. Yes, I said. Eventually. But not now. No, I admitted. Not now. So this pushed it forward. Yes. He exhaled slowly. Then I guess, in a strange way, it forced something that was already overdue. That's one way to look at it. There was a faint, almost humorless laugh on the other end. Lydia's not going to see it that way. I'm aware. She thinks you're trying to drive her out. I'm not trying to drive anyone out, I said. I'm just no longer holding everything up. He was quiet for a long moment after that. Then he said something that caught me off guard. I told her she needs to get a job. I sat up slightly. You did? Yes. And how did she take that? Not well at first, he admitted. But I think she knows it's true. I didn't say anything, because I wasn't sure what to expect from that. She said she hasn't worked in years because we didn't need the extra income, he continued. And now you do. Yes. Another pause. But I also told her it's not just about money, he added. It's about responsibility. That word lingered. Responsibility. It felt like something that had been missing for a long time. I'm glad you said that, I told him. I should have said it sooner. Yes. There it was again.
No excuses.
Just acknowledgement. So what happens now? He asked. We move forward, I said simply. And with us? I understood what he meant. Not the logistics. The relationship. That depends, I said. On what? On whether things actually change. He didn't answer immediately. I want them to, he said finally. Then they can. I mean it, Mom. I know you do. And Lydia, she needs time, he added. She does, I agreed. But time doesn't fix behavior. Effort does. I'll make sure there's effort. I believed him. Not completely. Not yet. But more than I had before. I'll start looking for apartments tomorrow, he said. That's a good idea. And I'll keep you updated. Please do. There was a brief pause. Softer this time. Mom, yes. I love you. The words landed differently now. Not routine. Not automatic. Real. I love you too, I said. When the call ended, I sat there for a while, staring at the quiet room around me. Nothing had been resolved. Not completely. But something had shifted. Daniel had stepped into the situation, not around it, not past it, but directly into it. And that mattered. More than any apology. More than any explanation. I stood up and walked into the living room, my gaze drifting to the empty space on my own mantel. I imagined the sculpture there, not as something beautiful, but as something symbolic. A line that had been crossed, and then redrawn. I turned off the lights and headed upstairs. For the first time in days, I felt something close to calm. Not because everything was fixed, but because it was finally real. And real things can be dealt with. 3 months changed more than the previous 3 years ever had. Not all at once, and not without friction, but slowly, steadily, things began to rearrange themselves into something more honest. Not perfect, not effortless, but real in a way they hadn't been before. Daniel and Lydia moved out sooner than I expected. It happened just under 3 weeks after I delivered the notice. No dramatic farewell, no final confrontation, just a quiet, practical transition. Daniel called me the night they signed a lease for a small apartment across town. His voice carried a mix of exhaustion and something else I hadn't heard in a long time: clarity. "It's not big," he said, "but it works." "That's what matters," I replied. "And it's ours," he added after a pause. That word stayed with me.
Ours.
Not borrowed, not supported, not quietly subsidized. Earned. They packed up the house over a few days. Lydia didn't call me during that time, and I didn't expect her to. Some space was necessary, not just physically, but emotionally. Daniel kept me updated in brief messages. Practical things. Timelines. Logistics. No drama, which in itself felt like progress. When they finally handed over the keys, I went by the property later that evening. The house was empty, stripped of their furniture, their decorations, their version of how things should look. It felt different without them, lighter, somehow, but not in a way that brought relief. More like a quiet reset. I walked through each room slowly, taking in the space as it had always been meant to be, just a property, not a burden. Not a responsibility tied to emotions I had been carrying for too long. The mantle in the living room was bare. The sculpture was gone. Daniel had insisted on taking it back to me. He dropped it off the next day, setting it carefully on my table like it was something fragile, not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. "This belongs to you," he said simply. I didn't argue. Now it sat in my living room, not as decoration, but as a reminder. Not of anger, but of a turning point. A moment when everything that had been unspoken was finally brought into the light. A week after they moved out, I listed the house at market value. It took less than 5 days to find new tenants. A young couple, both working professionals, respectful, straightforward. They didn't ask for favors. They didn't expect adjustments. They simply agreed to the terms, signed the lease, and moved in. It was simple. And that simplicity felt almost unfamiliar. The additional income changed things for me in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Not dramatically, but meaningfully. I replaced the old kitchen windows, something I had been putting off for years. I finally signed up for a watercolor class I had once dismissed as unnecessary. And I opened a savings account for Daniel's son, my grandson, with a quiet intention of giving him something stable, something earned, something free of complication. Daniel called me regularly after the move. Not out of obligation,
But because he wanted to.
our conversations were different now. Less surface level, less rushed. He told me about work, about the apartment, about the adjustments they were making. Downsizing hadn't been easy. Lydia had struggled with it at first, letting go of things, changing routines, accepting limits. But she was trying. That was what he kept saying. She had an interview today, he told me one evening. For what? A junior position at a design studio. I raised an eyebrow, even though he couldn't see it. She's excited, he added. Nervous, but motivated. That's good, I said.
And I meant it.
A week later, he called again. She got it. That was fast. They liked her portfolio. I smiled slightly. I'm not surprised. There was a pause on the line. She's been different, he said.
How?
Quieter. More to wear, I guess. I didn't respond immediately. Because awareness isn't the same as change. But it's where change begins. She wants to talk to you, he added carefully. There it was. The moment I knew would come. When? I asked. Whenever you're ready. I considered it. Not emotionally.
Practically.
Next week, I said. She can come by. The day Lydia came over, she looked different. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Less polished. Less controlled. More real. Her hair was pulled back simply, her makeup minimal, her posture less rigid than I remembered. She stood at the door for a moment before I opened it, as if she had been preparing herself for something she couldn't fully predict.
Hi, she said. Come in.
There was no tension in my voice, but there was no warmth either. Not yet. We sat in the living room, the sculpture visible on the shelf nearby. I noticed her glance at it briefly, then look away. I wanted to say this properly, she began, her hands resting tightly in her lap. Not through Daniel. Not in the middle of an argument. I waited.
I was wrong, she said.
Simple.
Direct. No qualifiers.
That's a start, I replied. She nodded slightly. I know saying it doesn't fix anything, she continued. But I need you to understand it wasn't really about you. I tilted my head slightly. Then what was it about? She hesitated, then exhaled. Insecurity, she admitted. I felt like I was always being compared, even when no one was saying anything. You had everything together. Your life, your independence, the way Daniel looks at you. That's not a competition, I said. I know that now, she replied quickly.
But I didn't then.
And instead of dealing with that, she paused, searching for the right word. I turned it into something else. Resentment, I suggested. Yes. There was a quiet honesty in that, one I hadn't seen before. I thought if I could take control of things, of the house, of the environment, of how things looked, I wouldn't feel so small, she said. And the comments?
I asked.
She winced slightly. They weren't accidental. I know. I wanted to feel superior, she admitted, even if it was just in small ways. That didn't surprise me, but hearing her say it mattered. I'm sorry, she said again. This time it wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't defensive. It was quiet. I studied her for a moment, looking for something I hadn't seen before. And I found it. Not perfection. Not certainty. But effort. That doesn't erase what happened, I said. I know. But it changes what happens next. She nodded, her eyes softening slightly. I'm trying, she said. I can see that. And I could. Not completely. Not without hesitation. But enough. We talked for a while after that. Not about the past in detail, but about what came next. Boundaries. Expectations. Space. Respect. Real things. Necessary things. Before she left, she paused by the door. Daniel told me you started painting, she said. I did. I'd like to see them sometime, she added, almost cautiously. Maybe, I said. And that was enough for now. 6 months later, we stood together at my grandson's school event, Daniel on one side, Lydia on the other, and me watching a small boy proudly hold up a drawing he insisted was a masterpiece. Life hadn't become perfect, but it had become honest. And that made all the difference. As I drove home that evening, I thought about everything that had happened. The charge, the note, the confrontation, the shift that followed. Some things break families. Other things reveal them. This had done both. But in the end, what remained was something stronger than what we had before. Not built on silence, but on truth. And that, I realized, was worth everything it had cost.